The wind whispered through the pine trees of Marlow Creek, stirring the fallen needles and tracing quiet patterns in the soft forest floor. The town lay nestled in the crook of Northern California's Sierra Nevada, wrapped in a November hush. The night had settled in fully, dense fog coiling around the base of the trees, the air sharp with the first sting of frost. There were no crickets, no owls, just the sound of boots pressing rhythmically into the damp earth. Police Chief David Carter walked that path every night. He wasn't required to anymore. He'd long since passed the baton of daily duty to younger officers. But something in him still needed the motion, the solitude, the subtle language of the woods that never changed. He moved with purpose, not out of suspicion, but out of routine, ritual. On either side of him padded two shadows, Rex, a retired German Shepherd K9 with a scarred shoulder and intelligent eyes, and Apollo, a young, eager trainee still learning how to be a sentinel. David carried a flashlight clipped to his belt, but he didn't need it yet. The moonlight did enough. His breath came steady in the chill, fogging slightly as he exhaled. Rex walked to his right, a few steps ahead, tail low, ears flicked forward, ever alert. Apollo stayed on the left, watching Rex like a student clings to a mentor's every step. No one expected anything unusual in Marlow Creek. That was its charm. No major crimes, no big city chaos, just quiet streets, sleepy diners, and peaceful walks. But that night, the woods were hiding something. Rex froze. David didn't hear anything. No snapping branch, no strange scent on the air. But when Rex stopped cold, ears pointed, body rigid, David's heartbeat shifted instantly. His hand moved to the leash clip on his belt without thought. Apollo halted a heartbeat later, mirroring Rex's posture. Then came the bark, not panicked, not aggressive, just sharp and clear, a signal forged through years of service. "Find it," David said, voice low but sure. Rex moved with sudden precision, gliding across the forest floor like a ghost. Apollo followed close behind. David's boots made more noise, crunching the leaves, scattering the silence. His flashlight switched on, casting beams through the mist. The dogs cut through a thicket and into a shallow clearing. Oak branches curled low like withered arms around the edges. And in the middle, Rex stopped again. He didn't bark this time. He just stood there, still, nose low to the ground. David stepped into the clearing, pulse pounding. He followed the line of Rex's stare. There it was. A bundle, small, motionless, wrapped in what looked like a tattered grey blanket. David's heart slammed into his ribs. He dropped to one knee, the flashlight falling into the grass with a muted thud. The blanket peeled back under his fingers, and what it revealed made his breath catch. A baby, tiny, unmoving. His skin was pale blue around the lips, the cheeks sunken, the hands curled into fragile fists. David leaned close, pressing two fingers to the baby's chest, praying for something. There, the faintest flutter, inconsistent, weak, but real. A whimper escaped the child's throat, a threadbare sound like memory itself was trying to cling to life. David exhaled, breath shaking. "Hang on, little one." Rex stood a foot away, eyes locked on the infant, unmoving. He didn't whine. He didn't bark again. He just watched. Apollo crept closer, sniffed the blanket, then sat down. Her gaze scanned the edges of the clearing, always guarding, always alert. David unzipped his jacket and wrapped it around the baby's small form, pulling him against his chest. The cold bit into his own skin immediately, but he didn't flinch. He only pulled the child closer. He clicked his radio. "Dispatch, this is Chief Carter. I've located an infant. Alive, but hypothermic and dehydrated. Immediate medical attention required. I'm en route to vehicle for transport. GPS coordinates incoming." The dispatcher's voice crackled through the static, but David was already moving. He retraced his steps, fast and focused, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly over tree roots and brush. Rex trotted beside him, casting occasional glances at the bundle in David's arms. Apollo stayed behind his left heel, glancing back every few seconds. The woods that once felt calm now pulsed with urgency. Each rustle in the branches above, each breath in the cold felt amplified. When the patrol car finally came into view, its reflective trim caught the light first. David's arms had gone numb, partly from the cold, partly from holding the baby so tightly. But he didn't stop. He whispered, more to the child than himself, "You're safe now. We've got you." He slid into the front seat, buckled in, and carefully laid the baby in the back, still swaddled in his jacket, folded now with a thermal blanket on top. Rex climbed in next, seating himself beside the baby like a sentinel at the gates. Apollo hopped into the passenger seat, sitting tall and straight. David didn't switch on the sirens. This wasn't a chase. It was a rescue. He pressed the gas. The cruiser hummed over the winding mountain roads. Pine trees zipped past the windows. The fog thickened in pockets, breaking only to reveal the curve of the valley and the lights of Marlow Creek in the distance. The baby didn't cry, and somehow that was worse. David kept glancing into the rearview mirror. The child's chest rose and fell, barely perceptible. Still alive, still fighting. "You're okay," David murmured. "You're okay. Just hold on." Rex didn't take his eyes off the infant. His ears twitched at David's voice, but his posture never shifted. Apollo let out a quiet breath, a soft huff through her nose. Her eyes scanned the tree line beyond the glass, flickering over every mailbox, every glint of passing metal. She didn't look at the child. That wasn't her role. Her job was to watch the world, to guard it from the unknown. David could feel the weight in his chest growing. It wasn't just the cold or the pressure. It was something deeper, the helplessness of it all. He'd handled robberies, standoffs, assaults, but never this. Never a child left for dead in a forest with no explanation and no reason except some unspeakable despair. And yet here they were. A baby barely clinging to life, guarded by a dog who had long since hung up his badge and another still too young to wear one. They crested the ridge and saw the town below. 2 more minutes. Fog curled around the streetlights as they descended. David didn't slow, but he didn't rush. Every second mattered. Every breath from the child counted. Just before the hospital came into view, the baby twitched. David saw it in the mirror, a tiny movement of a hand, a flicker. Rex saw it too. His ears pricked forward. His nose nudged a bit closer. David whispered, "Come on, little guy, come on." The cruiser pulled into the emergency entrance. Lights glowed yellow and pale behind the glass doors. As the car rolled to a stop, David unbuckled, scooped the baby into his arms, and stepped into the cold air again. Rex jumped down immediately. Not aggressive, just present. Apollo followed, scanning the shadows of the parking lot before falling in line behind them. David moved quickly through the doors, heart racing. Inside, the hallway lit up under sterile lights. The warmth hit his face as a nurse looked up from the desk, eyes widening at the sight of the bundle in his arms. No words, just movement. They weren't done yet, but a life had been found, and that was enough for now. The hospital corridor was bathed in sterile white light, the faint hum of fluorescent bulbs overhead mixing with the distant rhythm of heart monitors and hurried footsteps. But in that moment, all David Carter could hear was the thin, ragged breath of the infant pressed to his chest. The cold from outside still clung to him, but it was nothing compared to the chill that radiated from the tiny form wrapped tightly in his jacket. The automatic doors had parted like curtains at the beginning of a play, revealing a waiting room half asleep. But as David stepped through, urgency electrified the air. Rex trotted beside him in silence, his gait purposeful but measured, golden eyes locked on the bundle. Apollo flanked the other side, a step behind, ears twitching at every sound, her body taut with alertness. A nurse, early 30s, sharp hazel eyes behind tired glasses, looked up from a clipboard. Her name tag read Olivia Lang, and she moved with the practiced urgency of someone used to emergencies. But even she blinked in surprise at the sight of the sheriff, flanked by 2 K9s, holding a baby like something sacred. "Male?" she asked quickly, already moving. David nodded. "Found in the woods, alive, barely, hypothermic. Bay 3, now." The next moment's blurred, gurney wheels squeaking, warming blankets, soft hands checking vitals, quiet commands exchanged with almost military precision. Olivia and 2 nurses, jailer young with a buzz cut and nimble fingers, and Paul, older, calm, silent, formed a wall of coordination around the child. David stood back only after the infant was transferred onto a bassinet surrounded by warming pads and oxygen tubes. Rex halted just outside the doorway and lay down, paws aligned, gaze steady. Apollo remained standing, muscles twitching beneath her sleek coat, ears pivoting like tiny radars. No one questioned the dogs. Inside, soft electronic beeps began to fill the room, not strong but steady. Jailer swabbed the baby's chest and gently applied monitors. Paul set up an IV, while Olivia adjusted the oxygen flow, her brow furrowed. Vitals are low, she muttered, but not gone. Let's keep him warm and see if we can stabilize his core. David leaned against the wall, arms folded, jaw clenched. He wasn't religious, but in that moment he prayed. Not to a name, not to a book, just to the fragile flicker of life that had somehow held on through frost and silence. Olivia looked at him briefly. He's lucky, she said softly. He shouldn't have made it. David exhaled. He did, because of that one. He nodded toward Rex. Olivia's eyes followed his gesture. She studied the older dog, who had not moved a muscle. He watched through the open door, head resting low, eyes never blinking. There's something about him, she said. I've seen service dogs, I've worked with therapy animals, but this is something else. David allowed himself a brief smile. He's retired, but he never really stopped working. Inside the ER, the baby gave a tiny, high-pitched sound. Not quite a cry. More like a breath learning how to be a voice again. Every head turned. He's stabilizing, Olivia confirmed, her voice steadying. We're not out of the woods, but he's holding on. At the threshold, Apollo exhaled slowly, finally lowering herself to the tile floor. Rex didn't move, but his ears twitched. David knelt beside him, whispering, "Good boy, you found him." There were no cheers, no applause, just a quiet sense that something unspeakably important had happened, and they were all just barely catching up to it. Later, Olivia returned with a clipboard and asked for details. David provided what little he knew. No nearby vehicles, no signs of struggle, no trails. Just an infant, abandoned, wrapped in a grey blanket, left in the woods like something discarded. He had a name? Olivia asked. David shook his head. Not yet. We'll call him Noah for now, she said. David didn't argue. It felt right, something about survival, about water, about being carried to safety. Time passed slowly in that hospital corridor. Nurses moved in and out of the ER bay. The lights never dimmed, and the baby's monitor kept its quiet, the rhythmic beat like a second heartbeat for everyone in the room. David stayed nearby, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. Rex remained at his post, still as stone. Apollo dozed intermittently, waking at each footstep. Then came the call. David's radio crackled. "Chief Carter, this is Deputy Hale. We may have something. Local report says someone's been squatting in a cabin off Hollow Pine Road. Found a broken baby bottle in the kitchen." David straightened instantly. "Copy that. ETA 15 minutes. I'm bringing Rex and Apollo." He clicked off the radio and looked at the two dogs. "Let's move." Rex rose as though his muscles had never stiffened. Apollo followed, stretching briefly before falling into step. The three of them exited the hospital without fanfare. No one asked. No one stopped them. They simply returned to what they knew best, the trail. The patrol car tore back into the mountain roads. This time, David drove with a different energy. Less panic, more precision. There was something to follow now, a lead, however faint. As the car climbed toward Hollow Pine, fog curled again across the asphalt, silver in the headlights. Inside the vehicle, the mood shifted. Apollo sat upright in the passenger seat, eyes scanning. Rex stared out the side window, nostrils twitching. David didn't speak. He just gripped the wheel, his mind retracing every detail from the forest, from the ER, from the child's silent breath. The cabin came into view like something abandoned by time. Faded paint, half-collapsed porch, the door slightly ajar. Deputy Matt Hale stood near the tree line, his breath rising in plumes, his stance tight with nerves. "Chief," he nodded. "Neighbor said he saw movement yesterday. Place looks empty now, but we found this." He held up a baby bottle, cracked and dirty. David nodded. "Let's check it. Rex, go." The older dog moved forward, slow but purposeful, nose to the ground. Apollo shadowed David's left side, her posture shifting with every creak of the floorboards. The inside of the cabin smelled of mildew and dust. The walls wept with water stains, and a broken crib sat crooked in the corner. There were fast food wrappers, a space heater long dead, and the kind of silence that screamed neglect. Rex moved to the crib immediately, sniffed once, then looked back at David. Apollo moved toward a pile of blankets and pawed at something hidden beneath, revealing a small soft blue onesie. David picked it up, stained, worn, but unmistakably recent. "That's not all," Matt called quietly from the kitchen. He held up a torn piece of paper, handwriting scrawled pressed hard into the fibers as if written by shaking hands. David took it and read, "I've run out of food, of heat, of everything. I told Max to find someone who would help. He always listened. I hope one day he'll forgive me. No name, no return address, just desperation. David's throat tightened. She meant Rex, he whispered. She sent him. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of heartbreak, full of hope. David looked at Rex, who sat now near the crib, ears slightly tilted back, not in alert but in something that looked achingly like grief. They had a new direction now. But the weight of what had been uncovered would follow them wherever they went next. And somewhere out there, the mother waited. She didn't vanish out of cruelty. She vanished because hope was all she had left to give. The morning fog clung stubbornly to the trees along Hollow Pine Road as David sat in his patrol car, the engine idling beneath him. In the seat at his feet, Rex lay curled with his head resting lightly on his front paws. His eyes were closed, but his ears flicked at every sound. Apollo stood on the passenger seat, front paws propped against the glass, nose pressed gently to the window as she tracked the flicker of birds weaving through the treetops. The evidence from the cabin, blankets, a stained onesie, the broken bottle and the torn letter, had all been carefully logged, photographed and secured. But what lingered wasn't the physical remnants. It was the letter's voice, echoing between the lines, trembling with pain. "I can't keep him warm anymore. I told Max to find someone." David had known despair. He'd seen it behind locked bathroom doors, in shattered families, in late-night suicide calls. But this letter, this space, felt different. This wasn't reckless abandonment. It was something much more fragile. It was surrender. Back at the station, the precinct hummed with its usual rhythm, phones ringing, reports being filed, radio chatter in and out. But for David, everything felt muted. He placed the evidence bag on his desk, careful not to crumple the letter, then turned to his computer. He began with utility records, names tied to the cabin's meter over the past 3 years. Most were defunct seasonal leases, summer renters. Only a few showed any activity in the last 6 months. He filtered through each one, cross-referencing birth dates, known addresses, emergency contacts. Nothing stood out, until one entry connected to a pay-as-you-go electric account caught his eye. The account was flagged under the name R. Holloway. No first name, no full ID, just a cell number and a prepaid balance history that ended 3 weeks ago. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. He tried running the number through state databases, local records, even social media. No hits. Frustrated, he leaned back, sipping the stale coffee someone had left near the printer. A soft knock on his office door broke the quiet. It was Jailer, the nurse from the ER. "Hey, just wanted to give a quick update. Noah's still stable. His core temp is rising. He responded to the glucose gel. They've moved him to pediatric ICU, but he's holding." David let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Thanks. Keep me posted." Jailer smiled and started to leave, but paused. "You called him Noah?" "Olivia did." Jailer nodded. "It suits him." When she left, David turned back to the desk. The phone number, he stared at it again. Then, almost as an afterthought, he opened the Marlow Creek Neighborhood Registry, a public directory of residents updated annually. Most entries were irrelevant, but then he saw a familiar name. Elena Burns, age 78, a long-time resident of the property next to the Hollow Pine cabins. A retired elementary school teacher. The kind of woman who mailed letters to City Hall about potholes and hosted neighborhood pie contests. And, most importantly, someone with a memory like steel. He drove over before noon. The old 2-story house was shaded by flowering dogwoods, wind chimes lining the porch like a lazy percussion section. Potted herbs and faded rocking chairs completed the portrait of a woman with time and patience on her side. As David approached the door, Rex and Apollo trotted beside him like seasoned deputies. Before he could knock, the screen door creaked open. "You're here about that poor girl," the woman said, voice strong despite the years. Her eyes were sharp, blue, and as piercing as floodlights in a storm. She held herself with dignity, leaning slightly on a wooden cane. David nodded, removing his hat out of habit. "Mrs. Burns, I'm Sheriff Carter. We believe she might have stayed in the cabin next to yours." "She never gave me her name," Elilana said, ushering him and the dogs inside, "but I remember her." The house smelled of old books and cinnamon tea. Photographs lined the fireplace mantel, graduation caps, wedding days, holiday snapshots of grandchildren in mismatched pajamas. The kind of home you knew had witnessed decades of laughter, grief, and everything in between. She was quiet, Elelana said, easing into her rocking chair. Thin. Too thin. Wore baggy clothes. Always looked over her shoulder like someone might take her picture and ruin it. David sat across from her on the edge of a sagging couch. Rex settled immediately at his feet, while Apollo paced the room twice before finally resting near the fireplace. "Did she ever mention family?" David asked. "No," Elelana replied, folding her hands. "But I saw the bruises once, purple, yellow, right along her arms. She flinched when the wind touched her." David's throat tightened. "Did you see a man?" "A few times. Big guy. Loud. Never came inside. Just stood on the porch yelling. She'd freeze. Next day she'd be limping." "Why didn't you call it in?" David asked gently. "I didn't want to make it worse," Elena whispered, shame blooming on her cheeks. "I was wrong. I see that now." "You weren't the only one who didn't see the signs." David said, voice even. "We're not here to place blame. We just want to find her." "She loved that dog," Elena murmured, changing the subject. "The shepherd, Max, she called him. He was always beside her. She spoke to him like a person. One time I saw her in my garden, picking a peony. She tucked it behind his ear and smiled. First time I'd ever seen her do that." David's gaze flicked to Rex, now resting his chin on one paw, breathing slow and deep. Max. The name matched the letter. The trust she had placed in him wasn't just hope, it was belief. "She dropped something once," Elelana said after a pause, reaching behind the side table and retrieving a weathered birthday card. "Fell in my mailbox. Didn't have a return address, but it had a phone number." David took the card. A child's handwriting inside said "Happy Birthday, Mommy" in shaky letters. Below that, scribbled in blue pen, was a cell number. No name. "It might not work anymore," Elelana warned. "It's something," David replied. As he rose to leave, Elena bent down with effort, placing a gentle hand on Rex's head. "You did good, didn't you?" she whispered. "You found the boy." Rex didn't wag, he didn't move, but his eyes blinked slowly, as if acknowledging her words with solemn pride. Outside, the wind had picked up. David climbed into the cruiser and dialed the number. 1 ring, 2, then a click. No voice, no voicemail. He left a message anyway. "We have your son. He's safe. He's alive. Please call back." He ended the call. Apollo whined softly, ears angled down the road. "What do you hear?" David asked, following her gaze. "Nothing, just trees." But he trusted her. "Let's keep looking." They drove to the city park, a wide stretch of grass, cracked stone paths and half-dead oaks that had watched generations of children pass through. As evening crept in, painting the sky in streaks of lavender and rose, they saw her. She sat on a weathered bench beneath a dying maple, her frame swallowed by too many layers of clothes that didn't fit. Her hair was pulled into a tangled bun, skin pale and raw from wind, her hands trembling in her lap. Her eyes, those hollow, bottomless eyes, stared at nothing. She looked like a ghost still tethered to the earth by regret. David stepped out first, Rex at his side. Apollo followed silently. Rachel didn't move until she heard the whine, a soft, familiar sound. Her eyes widened. David approached slowly. "Rachel," he asked gently. "My name's David Carter. I'm with the Marlow Creek Police." She didn't speak. "We found a baby," he said, "in the woods. Rex, this dog led us to him. He's alive. He's at the hospital. He's safe." Rachel gasped like she'd been kicked in the chest. She rose too fast, stumbled, caught herself. "My son," she whispered. "Noah, he's not. David stepped forward, voice low. "Yes, Noah." She dropped to her knees. Her body convulsed with sobs, dry and aching. Rex stepped forward slowly, his body low, tail barely moving. Rachel looked up. "Max?" she whispered. Rex wagged once. She crumpled into him, fingers grasping at his fur. "You did it," she sobbed. "You saved him." Apollo watched from a respectful distance, quiet, present. David gave her space. When the tears slowed, he extended a hand. "We'll take you to him." And this time she stood. The ride to the hospital was silent, but it wasn't empty. Rachel sat in the back seat of the cruiser, buckled in, her body hunched forward like she was trying to fold herself out of existence. Her hands trembled on her lap, fingers twisting over one another. Her lips moved occasionally, mouthing words too soft to hear. Prayers, maybe. Apologies. Please. David couldn't tell, but he didn't need to. In the rearview mirror, he kept glancing at her face. Ashen, sunken, but no longer hollow. There was life there now, flickering behind her eyes. Fragile, terrified life. Beside her, Rex sat close, his body calm and steady like a fortress. Every few moments he glanced up at her as if to say, "You're not alone anymore." Apollo sat at David's feet, upright and sharp, eyes flicking between the dashboard and side window. Even she seemed changed, less cautious, more expectant. The hospital came into view like a beacon in the fog. Its lights glowed golden and warm against the falling dusk. The automatic doors slid open, and this time Rachel hesitated at the threshold. Her legs wobbled, not from cold, but from the overwhelming weight of fear. "What if he doesn't remember me?" she whispered, voice hoarse and raw. It turned to a voice steady. "Babies remember love, even if they can't say it." She nodded slowly, wiped her face with the back of her coat sleeve and stepped inside. Rex was right beside her, as he had been for years, in silence, in darkness, and now in reunion. The elevator ride up to the pediatric intensive care unit felt like an eternity. Every ding of a passing floor twisted her stomach tighter. Her hands clutched the fabric of her coat until her knuckles turned white. But Rex didn't move. He stood with quiet dignity, pressed close to her side like a memory given form. The hallway was bathed in pale blue light. The walls were adorned with drawings of suns and stars, laughter frozen in crayon and pencil. But for Rachel, every step forward felt like breaking through a fog of guilt and hope. She stopped at the glass door marked ICU, Pediatric. Her hand reached for the handle, hesitated, then dropped. David was behind her, not rushing her, just standing, silent. Apollo by his side, head tilted, eyes full of quiet awareness. Rex, as always, remained fixed at Rachel's side, unmoving but alert. She reached again. This time her fingers closed around the handle. The door clicked open. Inside, the world changed. The machines beeped rhythmically, one for heart rate, another for respiration. A warmer buzzed softly from a unit in the corner, and in the center of it all, cradled in soft hospital blankets, was Noah. He looked impossibly small, thinner than she remembered. His cheeks had lost their roundness, his fingers frail and delicate like dried flower stems. But he was breathing. His chest rose and fell with quiet persistence. There was color in his face, faint but there. Rachel's knees gave out. She caught herself on the metal bed frame, knuckles scraping against it, but she didn't care. Her hands hovered over him like she was afraid he might vanish if touched too soon. But finally, she placed her fingers on the back of his tiny hand. His skin was warm. A tremor ran through his fingers, then a twitch. Then his eyelids fluttered. "Noah," she breathed, her voice cracking apart. "My baby, Mommy's here." His eyes opened slightly, unfocused, but they turned in her direction. He didn't cry, he didn't smile, but his mouth opened and a soft, breathy sound escaped, a sound that held memory. Rachel broke. She lowered her forehead to his hand and sobbed, not with panic but with overwhelming relief. The pain of weeks without him, the guilt of her final goodbye, the agony of not knowing if he'd ever be found. All of it poured out in silence, broken only by the beeping of machines and the rhythm of healing. Outside the room, Olivia Matthews, the lead pediatrician, stood beside David. She was in her early 40s, tall, composed, with rich brown skin and a sleek ponytail pulled tight. Known for her calm in chaos, Olivia rarely let emotion shake her. But watching through the window, she wiped a tear before it could fall. "Is that her?" she asked softly. David nodded. "We found her in Marlow Park, alive, barely." Olivia's eyes shifted toward the dogs, especially Rex. "And that's the dog?" David smiled faintly. "That's Rex. The other one's Apollo, still in training." Olivia stepped forward, crouching slightly in front of Rex, who sat calmly outside the door, his eyes focused inward. "You brought him here, didn't you?" she whispered, reaching out gently. Rex didn't flinch. He leaned into her hand as she scratched behind his ear. "You're a hero," she murmured. Back in the room, a nurse entered. Susan, a woman in her 50s with grey-streaked blonde hair and a voice like soft linen. She checked the monitors, adjusted the IV line, and turned to Rachel with a gentle smile. "He's getting stronger," she said. "It's going to take time, but he's fighting." Rachel didn't look up. She stroked Noah's cheek with one hand, brushing away a tear with the other. "He always was stronger than me." Susan paused, then added, "You're here now. That's what matters." In the hallway, Apollo paced in slow, sweeping arcs. Every so often she nosed Rex's side, checking his breathing, his posture, his focus. She was young but observant, and she saw something different in Rex. His shoulders relaxed, his muscles no longer wound like wires. He had found what he was looking for. He had completed something sacred. Rachel eventually stepped out of the room, her legs unsteady. Her face was damp with tears, but her eyes held a flicker of something that hadn't been there since that night in the forest. Hope. Real, raw, breath-stealing hope. She knelt slowly in front of Rex, her voice a whisper. "You didn't just save him, you saved me too." Rex leaned forward, pressing his head into her chest. She wrapped her arms around him like she was trying to anchor herself to something unbreakable. And for several moments, they stayed like that, human and dog, grief and grace tangled together. Nearby, Olivia finally let her tears fall. "I've treated hundreds of children," she said to David, "but I've never seen anything like this. That dog, he didn't just act on instinct. He loved them." David nodded. He always did, even before all this. He was hers once before she disappeared. Olivia turned to him. "Then he didn't just bring the baby back. He brought her back too." Rex pulled back slightly, enough to meet Rachel's gaze one more time. Then, without a sound, he turned and returned to his post beside the door. Apollo joined him, laying down, her head on her paws, her tail twitching once in quiet agreement. They would not leave until both were safe. In the world outside, the sun had disappeared completely. But inside that hallway, where 2 K9s stood guard and a mother stood reborn, something glowed warmer than any light. They were no longer surviving. They were beginning again. The morning after Rachel's reunion with Noah broke slowly, with a sky painted in soft pastels, blush pinks, pale golds, and hints of dusty lavender. Marlow Creek was still waking up. The streets were mostly empty, save for a few early risers heading to the diner or walking their dogs in silence. The hospital stood quietly in the middle of it all, its brick facade glowing faintly under the early sunlight. The emergency floodlights had dimmed, but the story inside had only deepened. Rachel sat beside Noah's hospital crib, her back curled forward, arms crossed against her chest as if still shielding herself from the cold that had dominated her life for so long. The blanket covering Noah had slipped just a bit, and she adjusted it with careful, almost sacred hands. He looked better today. Still weak, still fighting, but his skin held more colour. His lips were no longer blue. His chest rose and fell with steadier rhythm. His fingers, yesterday limp, now twitched gently in his sleep. Rachel hadn't moved from that room since she'd arrived the night before. Nurses had brought her tea, a sandwich, a change of clothes, but she hardly noticed. Her focus remained fixed on the boy she'd once believed she'd never see again. Beyond the glass, Olivia stood with David, clipboard in hand. Her usual calm demeanour had shifted into something softer. As she reviewed Noah's vitals, improving if still unstable, her eyes kept drifting back to the scene inside. A mother and child reunited not with fanfare, but with silence and breath and the kind of aching love no words could capture. "She's been by his side all night," Olivia said. David nodded. "She's going to need time, but she's strong, stronger than she thinks. She's not the only one." Olivia turned her eyes toward Rex and Apollo. The two dogs still rested outside the room, unmoving. Rex sat upright, posture alert but peaceful, watching through the glass. Apollo lay beside him, tail occasionally thumping against the floor, her eyes alternating between the hallway and Rachel. David looked at Rex and saw something beyond loyalty, an understanding, deep and wordless. This wasn't just protection. This was memory. This was a promise kept. Rachel finally stood and stepped toward the door. She opened it slowly, stepping into the hallway, her eyes still rimmed red from the night before. Her shoulders, once hunched and folded in on themselves, were straighter now. She knelt in front of Rex again, not crying this time. She placed her hands on either side of his face, gazing into his golden eyes. "You were always watching," she whispered, "even when I couldn't." Rex leaned forward and nuzzled her cheek. David stepped forward gently. "There's something I need to tell you." Rachel looked up. "We scanned Rex's chip when we brought him in. Routine protocol. He was registered to you." Her eyes widened. "You adopted him years ago, didn't you? Back before all of this." She nodded slowly, memories cascading behind her eyes. "He was just a pup, shaking in the corner of the shelter. Noah was barely crawling, and I thought maybe he'd keep us safe. And he did, until I couldn't." David spoke with quiet certainty. He never stopped, even after you were gone. Tears brimmed again in her eyes, but they didn't fall. Instead, she exhaled, a long, shaky breath that seemed to release a weight from her chest. He guarded us when I had nothing, she said, and when I let go, he didn't. She turned to David. How did he end up with you? He was transferred into K9 service shortly after Animal Control picked him up. He had signs of trauma, but showed a rare kind of loyalty. I took him in myself when he retired 2 years ago. I didn't know his full story, not until now. And Apollo? Rachel asked. Still learning, but she's been watching him closely, picking up everything he teaches. Apollo, as if understanding, shifted forward slightly and sniffed at Rachel's hand. Rachel smiled and gave her a small scratch behind the ears. She's going to be something special, Rachel said. She already is, David replied. The door to Noah's room opened, and Susan, the kind ER nurse, stepped out with a quiet smile. He's awake. Rachel stood up immediately. Without hesitation, she walked back into the room, leaving David and the dogs outside. Through the glass, they watched her lean over Noah, stroking his forehead as he blinked up at her. He didn't cry, but he didn't look away. He knew her. And that was enough. Rex sat down again, this time a little farther from the door, as if giving them space. Apollo leaned into his side, her head resting gently on his shoulder. Their bodies created a silent barrier, guardians at rest, but never off duty. Olivia stood beside David again, arms crossed lightly. I've been a pediatrician for nearly 15 years, she said. I've seen kids pulled from car wrecks, house fires, overdoses, but I've never seen something like this. David didn't respond immediately. He didn't just survive the woods, Olivia continued. He survived because something wouldn't let him be forgotten. That dog, he didn't just protect him. He carried something bigger, memory, purpose. David nodded slowly. He was never really ours. We were just holding him until she came back. Olivia's gaze drifted back to Rachel. You think she can do this? I do, David said, but she shouldn't have to do it alone. As evening approached, the hospital grew quiet again. Rachel stepped out one final time before shift change, walking the hallway like someone returning from war. She approached Rex, knelt one more time and wrapped her arms around his neck. But this time she didn't tremble. I'm going to bring him home, she whispered. I don't know how yet, but I will. And you're always welcome. Rex didn't respond. He didn't need to. Apollo nuzzled Rachel's arm, and for the first time, Rachel laughed. Soft, surprised, like she'd forgotten what the sound felt like. Later that night, paperwork would be filed, child services would be contacted, and temporary guardianship would be discussed. But for now, none of that mattered. What mattered was the boy breathing in the bed, the mother rediscovering herself, the dog still standing guard, and the sheriff who had followed an old instinct into the forest and come out holding something more fragile than justice, hope. Outside, the sky turned indigo. The stars began to appear one by one above the silhouette of Marlow Creek. In that small hospital, under dim hallway lights and the patient watch of 2 German shepherds, a story that began in silence was rewriting itself in breath and presence. There was more healing to come, more truth to be uncovered. But for now, they had this moment, and it was enough. The first morning in the new house dawned with a strange kind of quiet, an unfamiliar stillness that wasn't filled with fear, but with peace. The rental was small, modest at best, perched at the edge of Oak Ridge, a sleepy town tucked into the rolling hills of upstate New York. It had 2 bedrooms, wallpaper that peeled a little in the corners, and a front porch that creaked when you stepped on it. But for Rachel and Noah, it might as well have been a palace. Rachel stood barefoot in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug filled with strong black coffee. The scent mingled with the soft light pouring through the window. She wore a soft flannel shirt someone had donated and a pair of leggings too long for her legs, bunched slightly at the ankles. Her auburn hair, once matted and tangled, was pulled back neatly. There were still dark shadows beneath her eyes, evidence of months, even years of unrest. But there was something else now, too, something that hadn't been there before. Colour, life. Behind her, Noah giggled from the living room. The sound floated through the hallway, warm and bright. He was seated on the carpet, surrounded by donated toys, Plastic trucks, worn teddy bears, a puzzle missing 2 pieces. In his arms was a stuffed bear nearly half his size, a gift from a stranger who had read their story and sent it wrapped in tissue paper and kindness. The living room had been decorated not with money but with intention. A quilt, hand-stitched and gifted by an elderly neighbour named Edna, draped over the second-hand couch. A framed photograph of Rachel and Noah, taken just weeks before, sat on the windowsill. Edna had become something of a guardian angel, checking in, dropping off home-baked bread, leaving little notes with hearts on them in the mailbox. Rachel moved to the doorway and leaned against the frame, watching her son play. He looked better, still small, still fragile in places, but his cheeks had filled in slightly, and his laughter came easily now. He rolled onto his belly, propping himself on his elbows to push a plastic truck across the rug, imitating engine sounds with the purest joy. A knock came at the door. Noah's head popped up immediately. "Doggies!" he cried, his voice high and excited. Rachel chuckled softly and moved to the front door, opening it with a smile already forming. Sheriff David Carter stood there, his uniform slightly dusty, his boots flecked with dry mud. On either side of him sat 2 familiar shapes, Rex standing tall and proud, his coat catching the morning light, and Apollo, eyes bright, tail thumping against the porch. "Good morning," David said, tipping his hat slightly. Rachel opened the door wider. "Right on time." Noah ran to the doorway with small, unsteady steps. "Rex, Paulo!" The dogs bounded in carefully, their excitement contained but undeniable. Rex lowered his head so Noah could wrap his arms around his neck, while Apollo licked the boy's outstretched hand gently. Their bond had grown even stronger in the weeks since the hospital, their visits now a sacred routine. Every Saturday morning, without fail, David brought them to see the boy they had once carried from silence into life. "They missed him," David said, watching. Rachel nodded, her eyes misty. "We missed them too." She stepped aside, letting the warmth of the house embrace all of them. Inside, Noah danced between the dogs, giggling and tossing a worn tennis ball for Apollo, who retrieved it with the patience of a teacher. Rex, ever the guardian, remained close to Noah's side, watching with quiet eyes. David stayed on the porch, sipping from a thermos Rachel had given him months ago. He never accepted coffee when offered, preferring to keep watch. It was habit, perhaps, or instinct. Rachel joined him, leaning against the railing. The yard stretched out in front of them, uneven, dotted with weeds and patches of clover, but it was theirs. "Do you think they remember it all?" she asked, her voice low. "Dogs don't forget," David said. "Not loyalty, not love, and neither do people." She smiled, but it wavered slightly. "I still dream about the woods. Not the cold, not the fear. Just Rex's eyes. The way he looked at me before I left, like he knew." David's gaze shifted toward the dog, now lying on his side as Noah curled against him. "He did," David said. "He was yours long before he was ours." Rachel blinked. "You knew?" David nodded. "We ran his chip. It matched an adoption record, your name. You took him home when he was just a pup. He'd been abandoned once already. I guess he knew what it felt like." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I left everything behind, but he never left us." "No," David said. "He waited. And when the time came, he led us back to you." The truth sat between them like a gentle weight, undeniable, humbling. Rachel remembered the early nights with Rex sleeping beside Noah's crib, his head resting on his paws, eyes flickering with every sound. She remembered how he would press against the door during storms, guarding them from the wind and thunder, and she remembered the day she told him to go, to find someone, anyone, who would help. He had listened. David stood, brushing dust from his pants. "You're not alone anymore." Rachel looked out over the yard. Apollo barked once, chasing a butterfly across the grass. Noah squealed with delight, arms raised as he ran after her. Rex yawned and rolled to his back, inviting the boy to climb onto his belly. Rachel's heart swelled. As David gathered the dogs to leave, Noah ran after them, feet pounding the dirt path that led to the gate. "Rex, stay!" he called, his small voice rising. David crouched beside him. "Rex has to help other people now, buddy, but he'll come back next week, I promise." Noah nodded solemnly, hugging Apollo's tail one last time before letting go. Rachel stood at the door, one hand on the frame, watching as the cruiser pulled away. The gravel crunched under the tires. The morning sun spilled across the road, and for the first time in a long while, the world didn't feel like it was slipping away. It felt steady, not perfect, not healed, but real. Each Saturday reminded her of the same truth, that healing wasn't about forgetting or moving on as if nothing had happened. It was about moving forward anyway. It was about learning how to live with the scar, not in spite of it. Rex and Apollo were proof of that. They hadn't just rescued a child, they'd reignited a bond, rebuilt a family, and reminded everyone watching that even in the coldest, darkest moments, love could find a way back. We don't get to choose where our stories begin. Sometimes they start in shadows, in silence, in frostbitten woods. But we can choose who walks beside us. We can choose to open the door when love comes back, sometimes on 4 legs, with golden eyes and a heart that never forgot. If this story moved you, share it. Not because it's extraordinary, but because it's possible. Somewhere, someone may be lost, cold or afraid. And maybe your voice, your kindness, your belief in second chances will be the thing that leads them home. Until next time, may we all have a Rex, and may we all be the kind of people he'd choose to follow.